These teens are as cold-blooded as ever. They could pass for any ordinary teenager, but make no mistake, these are killers who stab, shoot, and hack their victims to death, some of whom are relatives, close friends, and even babies. And when the law catches up to them, you won't believe what happens next. In this video, I will show you some of the most shocking reactions from teen killers after they receive the maximum sentence, life in prison. James Fairweather. On April 29, 2016, the people of Colchester breathed a sigh of relief after a 17-year-old teen by the name of James Fairweather was given a life sentence. To those who don't know him, this would seem like a harsh sentence for a kid, but Fairweather was nothing like most teens his age. At the age of 15, Fairweather had killed two men, 33-year-old James Atfield, a father of 5, and 31-year-old Nahid Almanea, a student of the University of Essex. Aside from the crime of killing two innocent people, what is even more appalling is how the crime was committed. It was brutal, personal, and clearly done by a monster. The nature of the crime was so hideous the police were led to believe it was a hate crime, but it wasn't. According to him, he was told to kill them by some voices in his head. Atfield was stabbed over 100 times while lying down on a field after having a drink.
Some voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it. And I saw him. It was laying on the grass, like that. It was like that, just fast asleep, where he was drunk. Then he goes, he's the one.
Fairweather describes how he killed Atfield in the same manner a skilled fishmonger would describe how to fillet a fish, completely emotionless and without any remorse.
Stand up.
Yes.
Went up to him. Stood over like that. I'm not helping that. I stabbed him first there. I've done it a few times.
He continues to narrate to the police how the voices in his head laughed as he stabbed Atfield. His second victim, Almanea, was killed 3 months later while walking near her home. She was stabbed in the stomach and then through the eyes and died instantly from her injuries. When asked why he stabbed her in the eyes, Fairweather claimed it was so that she could not see evil. After seeing him explain how he committed the crimes, the judge gave Fairweather 2 life sentences for both murders with a minimum of 27 years. But Fairweather didn't care. He joked with his father, blew kisses, waved, grinned, played with his glasses, and mouthed, "I don't care, I don't give a f*** during the sentencing." Nehemiah Grigo. Grigo said he had suicidal thoughts, but the 15-year-old did not plan to take his own life. Rather, he wanted to get into a shootout with the police and perhaps get killed. Nobody knows why he had such a thought, except for the fact that he was angry at his mother. But there has to be more, because getting angry at his mother is not enough reason for what he did next. Grigo shot and killed his mother while she was still asleep. He then killed his younger brother, who had become upset after learning what had happened to their mother. His 2 younger sisters, who by now were stricken with fear and crying in their room, met the same fate as his mother and brother. They were both shot and killed by Grigo, but the killer wasn't finished. He waited for his father to return home, and when he did, Grigo shot and killed him. After that, Grigo drove to the church where his pastor questioned him about his father. Grigo replied his father was dead, and that was when everything unfolded. Grigo was arrested and he quickly confessed what he did to the police. He was initially considered amenable to treatment, and after 6 years, Grigo appeared before a judge to be sentenced. It was an emotional moment as Grigo, who had turned 22 at the time, expressed remorse for what he had done.
I am sorry for taking our parents and our sins. I wish I can take it back, but reality is that we can't.
Grigo then went on to tell his family who were present at the court that he had been healed and prayed that they should also be healed.
I want no retaliation. I love you guys, and I want to see the best for y'all. And whatever you may do, and I do pray for you guys to have healing the way I'm having healing.
Despite his tears and apologies, the judge tried him as an adult and further stated that he was not amenable to treatment. Griego was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Dexter Johnson. 2 lovers, Maria Apares and Hui Ngo, were just having a nice time chatting sometime around midnight. Unknown to them, that night was not going to end like the previous ones because 18-year-old Dexter Johnson and his friends were on a rampage. According to authorities, Johnson and his friends were on a crime spree that lasted about 25 days. Within that time, the teens had killed at least 5 people, and soon they would be adding Apares and her boyfriend to their list of victims. As the teens drove around, they spotted Apares in the car with her boyfriend, and they carjacked the lovers at gunpoint. After robbing them, Johnson and his friends drove the lovers to the woods where Johnson raped Aparice. Her boyfriend was made to watch and taunted as Johnson assaulted his girlfriend. After the assault, Johnson and his friends then marched their victims deeper into the woods and shot them in the head. The prosecutor revealed that Noah was shot on the side of the head, execution style. On seeing that, Aparice screamed in horror before Johnson then proceeded to execute her in the same fashion. However, Johnson denies being the shooter, and his attorneys claim the shooting was done by another teen who was present at the scene. Years later, Johnson, who is now 31, stood before the judge to receive his sentence.
Dexter Darnell Johnson, the jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death.
After the jury found him guilty, after receiving his sentence, Johnson sat down and showed no reaction at first. Then suddenly, he jumped from his seat and rushed towards the victim's family. The police officers in the court reacted immediately, intercepting Johnson before he got to the family. There was chaos as the officers restrained Johnson and removed him from the court. His death sentence was halted a few hours before the execution on grounds of intellectual disability. However, he is likely not going to get any favorable treatment after his outburst in court on the day of his sentencing. Nicholas Lindsay. Lindsay shot a cop 5 times on February 21, 2011. At that moment, his fate was sealed. Crawford, a 25-year police veteran, was responding to a 911 call about a break-in. When he arrived, Crawford spotted the suspect and went to have a chat. According to the report, Crawford had just a notepad. Unfortunately, the 16-year-old teen had a gun that he bought for $140. Lindsay shot at the cop 5 times. A second police officer heard the gunshots, and when he got to the scene, he saw Crawford lying near his cruiser. On hearing their colleague had been shot, more than 200 officers joined the manhunt in search of the suspect. The next day, police officers received tips that led to Lindsay's arrest. Initially, the teen gave different accounts of the incident to the investigators, but on further questioning, he broke down and cried before revealing where he had disposed of the murder weapon. Crawford died a month later, and Lindsay was given a life sentence in 2012. The next year, Lindsay had a court hearing to reconsider his sentencing. He showed little interest in the court proceedings. It was almost as if he wasn't aware of the gravity of the situation. His attorney fought to have his sentence reduced to 40 years, claiming that Lindsay was responding positively to rehabilitation, but the prosecutors argued otherwise. Although he had obtained his GED while in prison, Lindsay had also received 10 disciplinary reports for different offenses, including fighting in prison, cutting another inmate's face with a sharp object, and possession of contraband. On seeing this, the judge concluded that it cannot be said that the defendant's actions reflect a strong potential for rehabilitation. His violent behavior has continued since the murder. With that, the judge upheld his previous sentence of life in prison. On receiving the sentence, Lindsay, who had remained passive and disinterested in the process, suddenly gave a sly grin. It is either he didn't understand what the sentence entails, or he didn't just care. I will bet on the latter. Shondell Jackson. After receiving his sentence, Jackson turned around to face the family members of his victim, but this time the police officers were ready for him. A female officer moved in and turned Jackson's head around, so he faced the judge again. But Jackson resisted, and that was when 2 more officers joined in and wrestled Jackson to the ground. He was finally subdued with a pepper spray. Jackson had just been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and this was not the first time he had behaved so badly in court. It all started with the death of 21-year-old Nathan Potter, a student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Potter was on his way home when Jackson and an accomplice stopped him and decided to rob him at gunpoint. Unfortunately, Potter had no money with him. Angered by this, Jackson shot Potter in the chest, killing him instantly, and the jury found him guilty of the murder. Rather than show remorse, Jackson turned to the family members of his victim, made some gestures at them, and cursed at them. But it didn't stop there. Jackson added to the pain and sorrow he had caused the family of his victim by also smirking at them while he was being led out of the court. During his sentencing, the prosecutor brought into evidence the video showing Jackson smirking and cursing at the Potter family. This must have influenced the judge's decision to put Jackson away for good. Jackson's outburst was expected and immediately contained, but surprisingly, family members who had come to show him support started hauling curses at Potter's family as well. This sparked an outrage on different social media platforms, and most people blamed Jackson's family for his bad behavior. Danta Wright. Nothing could be more humiliating than seeing your son's killer smiling and rubbing his hands in a manner that clearly shows he was excited. Wright smiled as the mother of the teenage boy he had. Killed wept bitterly while delivering an impact speech for her son. Adding to his provocative gesture, Wright decided to taunt the victim's family when given an opportunity to speak in court, saying, "I just wanted to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. I'll be all right. I love my family. It was a slap in the face and one that upset the judge so badly he did something unexpected. The judge stopped the court proceeding and decided to give the young boy a piece of his mind. According to the judge, in all his 23 years of being a prosecutor, he had always accepted a sentence agreement, but he was really tempted to make an exception in Wright's case. The judge said, "Watching you sit there and smile and laugh and shake your head like this is no big deal, I'm very tempted to just say I'm not going to accept this agreement. You'll go to trial." If found guilty in a trial, Wright would surely have received a more severe punishment compared to the 23 to 50-year sentence he had been given in the plea agreement. He could possibly have been given a life sentence, especially with that attitude of his. However, Wright's attorney issued an apology in court, probably saving the arrogant teen a lifetime of regret. The victim, Jordan Klee, was just 18 years old when he was shot in the head by Wright during a robbery. Klee's mother avoided the pain of trial by accepting the plea agreement, a move that guaranteed her son's killer would be out of prison at some time in the future. On the other hand, Wright's mother insisted her son was innocent. Antonio Barbeau. Barbeau was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 36 years. During his sentencing, the 14-year-old teen could not hold back his tears as he apologized for the pain and hurt he had caused by killing his great-grandmother.
I know I don't show my emotions much, and I myself am not sure why, but that doesn't mean I don't.
At that point, Barbeau was unable to keep going and his lawyer took over.
I took away someone's mother, their grandma, sister, friend, when I had no right to do so.
Although Barbeau regretted his actions, it didn't have so much impact in his sentence. Perhaps this is because of how brutal his crime was. Barbeau was 13 at the time he committed the crime. He and his friend, who was also the same age, went to Barbeau's great 78-year-old grandmother's house and beat her to death using a hatchet and a hammer. Barbeau had struck the woman first, but after hitting her, he felt sick and ran to the bathroom. When he pulled himself together, Barbeau came out of the bathroom to see his friend hitting the woman on the head with a hammer multiple times. The elderly woman stood no chance against the vicious teens, who, after seeing she was dead, dragged her body outside and attempted to put in the car. Perhaps they had thought of taking it somewhere to bury, but seeing that they couldn't put her in the car, they abandoned the body in the garage, stole some loose change and jewelry, then drove off to an eatery where they shared a pizza. According to a psychiatric evaluation, Barbeau could be suffering from a cognitive disorder from a car accident when he was only 10 years old. However, this wasn't enough excuse to turn a blind eye to what the judge described as nothing short of horrific. Kyle Williams. Williams sat cold and unemotional as the jury gave their recommendation to the court: life in prison without the possibility of parole.
We, the jury, advise and recommend to the court that it impose a sentence of life imprisonment upon Kyle Devonta Williams.
The jury had two choices: a death sentence or life imprisonment. Although Williams may not be too happy about spending the rest of his life behind bars, this was still a win, considering the alternative. Williams's crime had sealed his fate. From the moment he decided to pull the trigger on a cop, his options in life reduced drastically. His victim, Arnulfo Crispin, was an officer with the Lakeland Police Department. The 25-year-old police officer was frisking Williams and a group of teenagers when Williams shot him in the head. Crispin had called in his position before he got shot, and when officers arrived at the scene, Crispin was unresponsive and Williams was nowhere to be found. After a 10-hour manhunt, Williams turned himself in at the behest of his mother. He was arrested and later convicted of first-degree murder. According to the prosecutor, Williams had made his mind up he was not going to be going to jail, and the only way he could avoid that is by taking the gun that he had and using it to kill Officer Crispin. However, Williams's attorney argued that he wasn't the one who had shot Crispin. Rather, another teen had committed the crime, but they all agreed to let William take the fall. Both arguments seemed plausible because Williams is believed to be a gang member and could easily have been set up. This argument is worth a second thought, considering that despite the mountain of evidence presented, there was nothing that tied Williams directly to the crime, except for the testimonial of the other 4 suspects who turned around to testify against Williams. Perhaps this was why the jury decided to go with a life sentence rather than recommend the death penalty, which is what the victim's family asked for. TJ Lane. Lane walked into the court wearing a shirt, but it was not what he wore that caught everyone's attention, but what was written on the shirt. After he sat down, Lane unbuttoned his shirt to reveal a t-shirt with the word killer written on it. Maybe he wanted to look intimidating, and while he might have the sordid reputation of a high school shooter, Lane wasn't intimidating. Rather, his behavior would only offend the parents of his victims, and as if to show them he had no regrets about what he did, Lane kept smiling as the families gave their statements in court and even raised a middle finger at them. At the age of 17, Lane, who is described as a quiet kid who was often teased at school, opened fire in a school cafeteria at 7:30 a.m. using a .22 Klaber handgun. He confessed to shooting about 10 rounds of ammunition before he was chased out of the building by 2 teachers. By the time the shooting stopped, 3 male students were critically injured and died 2 days later. Another student was left permanently paralyzed, while 2 others with less severe injuries made full recovery. After he was arrested, Lane told the police that he had shot randomly at the students and that he did not have any target in mind. But other students who witnessed the incident claimed Lane knew the victims in school and had intentionally targeted them. He was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. Although he was tried as an adult and faced with a life sentence or death, Lane showed no remorse. In the end, Lane was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He must have evaded the death sentence by a hair's breadth because he committed the crime while he was a teenager. Regardless, the families of his victims could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that Lane would never be a free man again. But in September 2014, Lane came back into the spotlight after he escaped from Allen Correctional Institution where he was being held. He was recaptured the next day and transferred to a maximum security facility to serve the rest of his sentence. Jennifer Mee. At the age of 22, Mee had come under the media spotlight twice. First for her uncontrollable bouts of hiccups, which started when she was 15 years old. In her search for a cure, Mee became quite famous and was even featured in NBC's Today Show amongst many others. But her popularity hit a dark past. Before becoming a media sensation, Mee had a turbulent life. She was raped daily by 2 men. At 13, she was already dealing drugs on the street, and she had a miscarriage after her boyfriend punched her in the stomach. This side of her was unknown to the public, and her uncommon medical condition was not helpful either. It made her a target at school where kids thought she was faking the hiccups to get attention. This rumor started after a physician in one of the shows Mee was invited to noticed that Mee stopped hiccuping when she was talking. Eventually, Mee was cured by a hypnotist. And with her illness gone, the media turned their attention away from her. With time, Mee went back to her previous life of dealing drugs, but she took things a step further. She came up with a plan to rob unsuspecting strangers she meets online. She would lure the strangers to a location where her boyfriend and his best friend were waiting for them. 22-year-old Shannon Griffin had followed Mee to an abandoned building to buy marijuana. So far, everything was going well for the media princess-turned-crime queen. On getting to the location, Mee's accomplices grabbed Griffin, but he fought back, and in the process, Griffin was shot several times in the chest. Mee was later arrested, and although crimes like this would ordinarily not attract a lot of media coverage, her past celebrity status came back to bite her. She was charged to court where she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Mee cried uncontrollably as the judge read the verdict. Aiden Fucci. Fucci stood still and listened with rapt attention as the judge sentenced him. He showed no emotions, maybe because he knew how vile his crime was and that the punishment should fit the crime. Or maybe because he was a cold-hearted killer. The thing is, with Fucci, you can never know what's going on in his head. The judge in Fucci's case came to the same conclusion, saying that there was no motive for the crime. It wasn't greed, rejection, passion, or anger that compelled Fucci to stab his classmate to death. According to the judge, it was done to satisfy an internal desire to feel what it was like to kill someone. Fucci was only 14 years old when he lured his friend 13-year-old Tristan Bailey to the woods and stabbed her 114 times. Bailey fought for her life, fending off some of the knife attacks with her hands, but her killer was persistent and kept on attacking until she eventually succumbed. Before the murder, it is said that Fucci had told some of his friends that he was going to kill somebody in the woods and that he wanted to watch them bleed out. Although his friends may have considered this a joke of sorts, Fucci meant every word he said, because on May 9, 2021, he did exactly what he said he would do. Fucci remained quiet during his sentencing while his grandmother pleaded on his behalf, saying that although he deserved to be punished for what he did, the judge shouldn't take Fucci away from them forever. After much consideration, Fucci was sentenced to life in prison.
I sentence you to life in prison. Because of your age, you are eligible for review of the sentence in 25 years.
At the time of his sentence, the teen killer was only 16 years old, Brandon Spencer. Spencer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving at least 40 years of his sentence. Before the judge read his sentence, Spencer, who had already been crying, started begging for mercy, saying, "I am not a bad person, but I have made mistakes. I am not like some gangbanger that she tried to portray me as." As the judge read out the sentence, Spencer, who was visibly upset, shut his eyes and shook his head in disbelief before he banged his head twice on the desk in front of him. It was an emotional moment fueled by the fact that most people, including a victim of the shooting, believed Spencer was innocent, and others claimed he didn't deserve a sentence of life imprisonment for attempted murder, considering that he had no significant criminal record, and many people vouching for his character. The incident for which Spencer was convicted took place during a Halloween party at the University of Southern California campus. Spencer had attended the party with many other teens when gunshots erupted. Although nobody died, 4 people were injured, and the investigation led to the arrest and conviction of 19-year-old Spencer. Spencer insisted he was innocent, but the prosecutor presented witnesses who confirmed that he was the shooter. In addition to that, the prosecution painted a picture of Spencer as a gang member who was out for revenge after being shot at by a rival gang member the previous year. Spencer's tweets and pictures showing him posing with a gun were used as ammunition against him. Although his attorney argues that the persecution argument was a stretch, and there were huge inconsistencies in the witness testimonies, the jury still voted for a life sentence for 4 counts of attempted murder. Spencer's fate was decided in about 3 hours. He would be at least 61 years old before being considered for parole. By then, he'd have spent half of his life in prison, and that is only if his parole is granted. David Moses. Moses was convicted of killing an 81-year-old woman when he was just 17. During his sentencing in 2012, Moses showed no sign of remorse. Instead, he smiled, yawned a couple of times, and seemed to have slept off at some point. He clearly wasn't fazed by the fact that he had brutally murdered an innocent woman and was facing a life sentence. Dorothy Session was at home cooking dinner when 2 teens broke into her house. Moses and his accomplice, 15-year-old Nash, had entered the house believing that nobody was home. On seeing Session, Moses beat up the elderly woman so badly that she was unrecognizable and then left her bleeding to death. This is not the first time Moses has exhibited violent behavior. He had a long criminal history that is believed to be a result of his troubled upbringing. He sexually assaulted his sister and a cousin who was developmentally disabled, along with 7 other children in a group home. His attorney pleaded for leniency in his sentencing in the form of parole after 25 years. But the judge was not having it, and why would he? After seeing Moses' behavior in court, nobody would believe he felt the slightest remorse, nor was there any sign that he was likely going to be rehabilitated after spending some time in prison. So it was not surprising that the judge handed down a sentence of life in prison without parole. After receiving his sentence, Moses was escorted out of the courtroom. He didn't seem to give a second thought to the fact that he would be spending the rest of his life in prison. However, he tried to appeal his sentence in 2016, but the judge acknowledged that Moses had not taken any significant step to rehabilitate himself since he was convicted in 2012. With that, the judge decided to uphold Moses' previous sentence, sending him right back to prison and dashing his hopes of ever becoming a freeman. Dylan Shoemaker. Schumacher bursted into tears the moment he stepped into the crowded courtroom. Anybody seeing him cry would be right to assume the 16-year-old teen had not intentionally beaten a 23-month-old baby to death. But what if I told you that this was all part of an elaborate scheme, planned by Shoemaker to soften the heart of the jury and possibly get his sentence reduced? It may seem a bit far-fetched, but wait till the end of the story. Shoemaker was babysitting his girlfriend's baby, Austin, when the young boy started crying. Out of frustration, Shoemaker pounced on the baby, slapping, spanking, and slamming him on the floor before he muffled the cries with a pillow while punching the baby on the head several times. Austin died from the injury, and that same day, Shoemaker was setting up a drug deal. But that was not his only offense. Prison records revealed in the courtroom proved that Shoemaker's tears were indeed crocodile tears meant to sway the jury into believing that he was indeed remorseful. Shoemaker had called his mother while he was in a holding center, and in their discussion, Shoemaker said to his mother, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they are going to feel sorry for me." After calling him out, the judge, who was clearly upset at the fact that Shoemaker tried to manipulate the court, sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. The question is, are they really sorry, or they are just sorry they got caught? If you like this video, click the card on your screen to see more videos like this.